What's going on, everyone? Mike here at the BFH Garage, and today I'm installing a set of Revolution gear and axle 1350 U-joint chromoly shafts. These are made in the USA and they're awesome. These Revolution gear and axle 1350 chromoly shafts, they're made in the USA and these are warranted for life. If you break it, reach out to them, they ship you another one, you ship the old one back, no questions asked. I've had mine for, oh gosh, I don't know how many years I've had it, but since they first came out with these, I've not had one problem with them whatsoever. So very high quality, love them. Come on over here and I'll show you what they're all about. Talk a little bit about these things so you can understand what they're made from. So you have these 1350 U-joints here. These things are pretty beefy. On your stock shaft right down in there, they use these little C-clips right here to hold it in place. And the reason that these shafts tend to fail, number one, because they're made of a more of a mild steel, not chromoly, but then these will under load fall out of the U-joint, holding it in place, and eventually the caps work a little bit, and then everything gets bound up. They stretch the ears out, and you'll see that the yokes get bent way out of proportion, or they even break and snap, and that's because everything gets real loose, starts falling apart. Now, the 1350 shafts here with these yokes are held in with a full circle clip, and that prevents them from ever trying to walk out and fall apart on you. The strength difference there is huge. Now let's do a side-by-side comparison of a Revolution shaft with a stock shaft. You can see the U-joint cap hole is far bigger. We've already discussed the U-joints there. You can see how this has a ton of meat around that yoke, where these are all that's needed for a stock vehicle, and that's completely fine in a stock application. The problem is when you start going off-road and you put some stress to these things, they're gonna wanna deflect, bend, break, and all that. This shaft right here is going to keep that from happening. So all the beef here, let's turn them on their side this way now. And you can see right here, made in USA. When you turn them sideways this way, look at the difference of this yoke versus that one. There's just really no comparison. Plus, with it being all chromoly, those shafts are excellent for your lightweight Wrangler, specifically in this case here, TJ, up to 35-inch tires, no problem. To be honest with you, these could probably handle bigger than a 35, but I don't recommend going above 35-inch tires on a TJ unless you're going to bigger axles anyway. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's put these things together and show you how to install them. Before I start putting these axle shafts together, I want to inspect the unit bearing that's on there. This one's pretty rusted out. I can tell it's going to be a problem trying to get that thing off of the axle shafts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray it with some PB Blaster right now. Let that stuff start working while I'm actually putting together the axle shafts. So I'll do this to both sides. And to be honest with you, my preference would be to just go right to new unit bearings. The owner said he's going to do that later on. So for right now, we're just going to get these changed out for him and get it all set up. But spray those now and hopefully they come off. Okay, let's put together the axle shafts. First thing I do is I get a really light coat of grease and I put on the inside of the ears here. That way the U-joint caps go in without any issues. If you don't do this, they can kind of bind up a little bit. Just a really light coat, it'll push out the excess anyway. So I pulled the caps off. You're gonna notice this side's nice and shiny. This side has the black spacer that goes down in there. So I wanna make sure that this one goes to the cap that doesn't have the spacer. In fact, what I'll do is I'll take that off and I'm going to put it back in the cap it came off of, because I don't wanna double them up and I don't want it to get bound up in there. So you wanna make sure that you put that where it goes, otherwise that can create some problems. All right, back to this. Let's get our circle clips on. And I'm gonna start with the short shaft first. I'm gonna gently set that upright. I'm gonna take this cap. Now you wanna verify and inspect that all of the needle bearings are in place like they're supposed to be and that they didn't start to, fall out. And then I'll take this U-joint and I'll set it in the cap right there. And that way the trunnion's in the bearings and the bearings can't fall out. Get yourself a wooden block, the whole purpose of this, you don't want to destroy the wood. You don't want to destroy your caps. And you're going to hit right here. You don't want to hit on that because you can bend that. So you want to hit back here, start tapping. You hear how it went home, right? So you can look right there. I have room I could put my C-clip on there, or my circle clip, and I think I'm going to do that. So a good pair of C-clip pliers help. My good pair, I just broke one of the other ones on a different project, so now I'm having to use my cheap pair. So I'm going to make this work. But if you have a good pair, believe me, it makes this job a heck of a lot easier. And you're going to simply get that down and around, and that's going to fall in that slot. And you'll know you have it right because you see how as you play around with that, oh, this cheap pair. As you move this, it turns freely. You see how the C-clip moves around? Now there's one more thing I want to show you here in just a second. I'm going to turn these over to the side, and the reason being is when you look at this circle clip here, you see how it's thinner here and it's thicker back here. If you put that thick part to the back side, it can bind a little bit. So always try to turn these to the side, and then that is a non-issue at that point. So that still has a little bit of room here, so this cap's more likely going to get pushed back that way once I start putting the other side on. So now that I'm putting this side on, same thing. First thing you want to do is make sure all your needle bearings are there. These are. Going to set it like that, nice and gentle. Going to turn this over. Now I'm going to take my U-joint, slide it down in there so that way those needle bearings don't come out of there. And now I'm going to work on this side. You could hear how that kind of hits home. It's not enough. It might be enough that I can get that C-clip on there. I'm going to give it one more good whack here. There we go. And now, I'm going to try to get this one on. I get my handy dandy cheap pliers on there. So you're just going to spread the circle clip out until it slides right over the cap. It'll recess into the slot, and I wanted to tell you that you need to be 100% certain that you have that thing in the groove. If not, this will fall out, and you could end up having the same problems you do with the stock shaft in the sense that it's going to allow that cap to fall off and cause other damage. So I can turn it there. I'm good with that. Now, I'm going to get the long side done. Pull the caps off. Get that back inside that cap, don't want to lose that. I'm going to put my circle clips on first. And you do not need to grease these U-joints. They come with the right amount of grease from the factory. All you need to do is install them. So I'm going to set that there. Turn. Everything's in line. Now you have to kind of lift up on this shaft to get everything to line up right. Get that cap started. I forgot to put my lumber over here first. So I'm going to take my block, put it right here. Make sure nothing fell out of place. Get that started. I'm going to turn it over. Make sure that falls in so that way the needle bearings don't come out. We're going to start tapping. Again, you're not hitting here, you're hitting here. You hear how that thing comes up, you see how that comes up. And that is good. I'm going to go ahead and secure my C-clip. If I get my cheap pliers to work. So in this side here, looking at it, you can see where this clip did not fall into the groove. Now it's in there. You can hear it click in. I saw it click in. I'm sure I could take this and make it move. There we go. That's set. Now I'm going to take this side. Needle bearings are all good. Straight over, turn it over. I'm going to let the joint fall into that cap. Make sure we're not losing needle bearings. And then hit here. Reach in with your pliers. So want to make sure this has good rotation both ways, no binding. Double check those circle clips, triple check those circle clips. That's the last thing you want falling apart on you on the trail. So now what we got to do is throw the unit bearings in and install the axles. Okay, it's time to get the unit bearing off of here now. So just to be clear, the axle shafts that I built are going in a different axle, and I'm swapping in a completely different axle underneath this Jeep. But the one thing I need to do is I need to take the unit bearings from these axle shafts, put them on the Revolution shafts, and then the owner will upgrade those unit bearings at a later time. So again, I've already sprayed the brake, I'm sorry, not the brake clean, but the PB blaster on here to let it soak. I need to get the brakes off of here, get the rotor off of there, and then we'll start taking this apart and I'll show you that's done. Now here is a quick note of caution, I guess. If you do not have an impact wrench to get the 36 millimeter nut off of here, then my suggestion to you is to leave the brakes on, have somebody sit inside the Jeep and apply pressure on the brakes while you break that nut loose, because it can be a bear. Once your brakes are off and everything's apart, it's hard to get that torque needed. So have somebody sit inside, push the brakes, this little retainer comes off, get that nut broken loose, then you can go ahead and continue on with everything else. Okay, with the brakes off, you have a cotter pin here that you have to straighten out, and this one appears to be rusted, but we'll get it straightened out. Far easier to just get new unit bearings that way. Your axles, everything's done at the same time, and you kind of know the history of what's going on here, but we don't have the time to go get these. I need to get this done, so we're just gonna get it done. This little retaining clip here pops off, or should pop off. There it goes. And there's a little spring washer behind it, so make sure that stays together. Now you have the 36 millimeter nut there. Like I said, without an impact wrench, this thing's gonna be a bear to get off. With the impact, make short work of it. And I cannot tell you how much I love my Milwaukee impact wrenches. These things are awesome. That is one sponsor I would take for sure. Now there's a washer on here. You got to get that off of here as well. All right, I'll get that off here in a second. So now the next thing we need to do is on the back side, there are, where'd my little cheater bar go? There are 3 13 millimeter bolts, let me just show you, that hold this unit bearing in. And they're 12 point. That's this one right here, this one right here, and there's another one on the backside right over there. So you need to get those broken out and or broken loose and taken out. Now that's another one that if you can soak it in PB Blaster before, that is the way to go, because those sometimes are a bear to get out, and that's why I choose to use a breaker bar. Now that we have the three 12.13 millimeter bolts off, you can try to pull this off, and you can tell that thing isn't going anywhere. So how do you get this thing off? Well, there's a couple tricks you can do. The first one is to leave this bottom unit bearing bolt in there and put a socket between the inner C and the head of that bolt. And then you could have somebody turn to the driver's side slowly, and what that'll do is that'll force that unit bearing out of the position. Another thing you do is take a dead blow, kind of work it. You see all the junk start to fall off. You can try to work this back and forth a little bit. Let's see if you get it off. So I'm starting to see a gap, so it's definitely moving. So I'm going to continue to work this just a little bit. There it goes. These things can be a big pain in the butt, so one of the things I always recommend is after you pull these out, the inside of the knuckle there, I'll take anti-seize and put that in there. So now we have the next problem, which is the unit bearing still attached to the axle shaft. Well, this one's going to slide out fairly easily. Sometimes that's not always the case. In this case it is, so I'm going to pull this off. I'm going to inspect the unit bearing. Here's that washer we're talking about. You don't want to lose that. Unit bearing actually feels pretty good. It's just dirty as all be, so no problems there. Don't forget your brake dust shield. You can see where all the rust comes in on this and how everything tends to stick to each other. So if we pull out the short side here, oh, you want to see a bad U-joint, listen to this. That is not good. Good thing we're replacing these. Things are toast. So you see you have all the stuff in here. This is where that unit bearing sits. So I'll take a wire brush, get all that cleaned up. I'll even take some fine grit sandpaper, clean it up. Then I'll put a nice coat of anti-seize in there when I put that unit bearing back in, so that way it doesn't corrode and get stuck again. So that's all there is to that. I'm going to get the rest of this axle pulled and we'll move on to the rest of the setup. Speaking of bad U-joints, I pulled this off of the passenger side and I just have to show you this. So he was complaining that it felt like the steering was all over the place and everything was jacked up. Look at this thing. This thing is completely shot. There's no needle bearings in there left whatsoever. I have the axle out from underneath the Jeep. I'm getting ready to put that new axle in, but before I do so, I need to install my axle shafts. So to put these back together, I need to take the unit bearings, and these unit bearings, I cleaned them up, checked them. They actually feel pretty good. They sound pretty good, so it should be okay for a while until you can get them replaced. But the advantage you're gonna have with your axle still in your Jeep is that you can either apply the brakes after you get this on or put a wedge in there, or if you have a locker, you could engage your locker and tighten this nut and get it down to spec. One other quick thing I want to mention real quick first too is that you are going to discover, and I'll show you when we get to the axle, that your three bolts that retain your hub, those with this 1350 chromoly shaft, there is a slight interference issue, and it's made known, and it's not a big deal. What you need to do is take and grind down the flange of these retaining bolts there. So if you see that, this one's pretty wide, this one here is narrower, this one will go through the knuckle and still clamp down just fine, but if you don't do that, then the ears will click against it and it creates problems. I'll show you that when we get to the axle. So the first thing I want to do right now is get my unit bearing on. So I'm going to take it, line up my splines, and get it set on there. So now I take my wave spring, find a matching cotter pin hole, because sometimes these do not line up. I do have new cotter pins, so putting that through there. I'm going to bend this around this way, bend this one around this way, and we are all good. I'll bend those in just a little bit more. Let's get it over to the axle and get it installed. So before I do anything and forget, that's where the seal is going to ride. So I'm going to get some grease. I'm going to put that around there, and I already have some in on the seal. So I just want to make sure that I have plenty for what I need in there, and I'm not forgetting to do that, because that's easy to forget. Now the very next thing I'm going to do, remember we talked about taking some anti-seize. You can use whatever anti-seize you have, I really don't care, up to you, but put it around here where the unit bearing mates up, because that is where it likes to get stuck. So smear it around real good. And you don't have to worry about any of that stuff getting stuck. Now we need to take the brake dust shield. That needs to go on to where it's going to match up with the brakes there, so that'll go like that. So I'm setting this over the axle shaft. Now when you go to put the axle shaft in, you want to guide it through that inner seal. You got to be very, very careful. And you'll know when you get there and if you're in it or not. You see how it just starts to go nice and easy, and that's what I want. So it's engaging into the ARB now. So I can rotate that, get those holes lined up, start kind of tapping this in a little. There we go. Start getting it in there. We're going to get that set. Now I'm going to take one of these bolts that I ground down. And make sure I get it started. So now I'm going to show you why we need to take off the flange of those bolts. If you see there, and you rotate this, you see how close it gets. Now let me go back this way, and I'm going to go to full lock. So if you're turning, you see how close that comes to the head of the bolt. Now that's not even hitting the flange, but imagine the flange being right there. That would create all sorts of problems. So you can see how it clears this one. Let's go to the other side now. And what I've done is I've installed a normal flange bolt. This one has not been shaved down. And so as you turn without doing anything, you can see right there, listen, you see how that U-joint cap will catch on that. You don't want to do that. Now the other problem too is sometimes you could have the yokes catch on that as well. So now let's go to full lock the other way, and you're going to see exactly why right there. So that's where the yoke catches it, and those flanges on those bolts have got to be cleared out. You clear them out, it's not an issue. So let me put a regular one in and I'll show you. I replaced the full flange bolt with one that I shaved down. So now that we have that, there's no interference issues there whatsoever. Let's go around to the other side. And now there's no interference issues there either. So that allows us to get the full range of motion and steering, get the full benefit of those 1350 U-joints, the strength of them, and without any issues as far as binding up. So that's all there is to this chrome-moly axle shaft install. If you have any questions, please post them below, and I'll try to get them answered the best I can. There's one thing I almost forgot to mention. So when you take a regular bolt that has the giant flange like that, I take and I grind it down using my drill press. I turn the drill press on and then take a grinder that gives me a good even grind the whole way down, or the whole way down. But there's another option. If you tighten up these bolts to spec, which is 75 foot-pounds, you can put a marker on there and kind of only ground down the one side with the grinder. The downside of that is that metal expands and contracts with the heat. So if you break down on the trail like I did, it was a different environment than when I put these in. And when I went to tighten everything down, they ended up being 90 degrees to where they were before, even though they're torqued at the same spec. So keep that in mind, that you can only ground down one side like I did there. But the better optimum thing to do is to take it to your drill press or ground around in a circle with your grinder. It may not be perfect, but it'll be fine. And you can get it a lot smaller diameter than what the original flange is, and that'll still work. So even if it's hot outside, you put it back in, there's no problems. If it's cold outside, it's the same diameter all the way around, it's not gonna be a problem. Whereas if you only take off one side of that flange, that's when you're gonna run into problems.